respected President of the occasion, the very Reverend Yanan Samuel Ramban, Superior of Mount Thabore, Dayara, the very Reverend CEO Joseph Ramban, Dr. Sam V. Daniel, Principal, Reverend Father Benjamin Mathan, whose welcome speech I'm sorry to have missed, distinguished fathers, teachers, students, friends, എല്ലാവർക്കും എൻ്റെ വിനീതമായ നമസ്കാരം. നിങ്ങൾ ഇംഗ്ലീഷിലല്ലേ പ്രസംഗം പ്രതീക്ഷിക്കുന്നത്? യെസ് ഓർ നോ? യെസ്, ഓക്കെ, ശരി. അല്ല, ചില കൺഫ്യൂഷൻ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. ചിലർ പറഞ്ഞത് ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് മീഡിയം സ്ഥാപനമാണ്, ചിലർ പറഞ്ഞു ഇവിടുത്തെ ആൾക്കാർക്ക് മലയാളമേ അറിയുള്ളൂ. പിന്നെ വേദി കയറിയപ്പോൾ പിന്നെ അച്ഛൻ എന്നോട് പറഞ്ഞു, അല്ല ഇവിടെ ടീച്ചേഴ്സൊക്കെയാണ്, അപ്പോൾ ഇംഗ്ലീഷിലാണ് ഒരു പ്രഭാഷണം പ്രതീക്ഷിക്കുന്നത്. I thought, let me get it clear from the audience. അങ്ങനെയാണെങ്കിൽ I'll say a few words. It's a great privilege, of course, to be invited by you to deliver the Thoma Dionysius Memorial Lecture this year. In fact, our former Chief Minister, Shri Chandi, was particularly insistent that I should come and deliver this lecture here. And I'm sorry that you've all been kept waiting a little while because of the distance from Pathanapuram. I had a function there this morning at the Government Women's College where we inaugurated a Gandhi study club. And then I had to come all the way. So in the morning, traffic, as you know, can be a bit severe, particularly coming out of the city. So once again, please accept my apologies for having kept you waiting. Though I understand you have used the time well and already gone through the presidential address and the songs and so on, so that you don't have very much left to endure other than my own remarks. I was very struck by the extraordinary life of Thoma Dionysius. Born in Mavelikara in 1872, he lived, as we know, till 1972. I beg your pardon, he was born in 1887, lived till 1972. God gave him a lengthy innings, 85 years, in order to make an impact upon this part of the world and upon the Malankara Orthodox Church, where he served with extraordinary distinction from a very young age, having become a deacon soon after college. He continued, became a Ramban, then ended up, as you know, as the bishop. And his leadership of the church has been commented upon by so many people. There was an earlier period when he was still a deacon, where he established a reputation throughout the church as a great and compelling orator, but not just a fine speaker with great content, who did a great to heal the divisions in the church at a time in which there was a threat of a schism and two different schools of thought were contending in the church. He traveled the length and breadth of the Mavelikara area in order to inspire people with his oratory. When he came to Pathanapuram, it is said it was just a kada, and it is only after his service and the institutions he established that the kada became a nada. And now Pathanapuram is, of course, reputed for the outstanding collection of educational institutions it houses, at the peak of which, the apogee of which, is St. Stephen's. And I'm very proud of that because I myself am a product of another St. Stephen's in Delhi University, not an Orthodox but an Anglican institution, nonetheless honoring the same first martyr of the Christian Church, who of course was stoned to death in the 1st century AD. And all of you, in honoring St. Stephen's name here in Pathanapuram, are also remembering the sacrifices that have been made by the great men of your faith, and I should say great women as well, though sadly in the history of religion we know not enough about the great women who've also done so much to advance the cause and the values of the various faiths of our country. Now, the Malankara Orthodox Church does not need me to tell you about Thoma Dionysius, because he is one of your great heroes and you're already aware of his immense contributions, both in theological and liturgical terms, and in terms of building up the institutions which provide the underpinnings and the foundation for any great church to flourish. All that you know. So let me spend a few minutes talking about his other major accomplishment, which was as an educationist. As we all know, education is in every respect the key to progress. And when Thoma Dionysius came here and found people, very poor people, forest dwellers, people of lower caste and underprivileged communities, deprived of the possibility of effective education, he took it upon himself to create the institutions that would impart education to the less fortunate, and indeed, in due course, to the more fortunate as well, because what could be more fortunate than coming and acquiring an educational qualification from a prestigious institution? But when he founded it, there was no prestige associated with such institutions. He had come to serve ordinary people, come to serve the poor, and it is said that he served the poor also by personal example. I was speaking to the professor here, who is the grandson of Thoma Dionysius' brother, and he is saying that in the family there is a story that when people gave him any gift, he would not look at the gift, he would put it in his pocket, and the first poor person who came by, the first person in need, he would take out the gift without even looking at what amount of money it contained and give it to the first poor person he saw. That was his heart, that was his spirit. And it's remarkable that with this kind of compassion and generosity, he also turned to the needs for educating the individuals who in so many ways were lacking in the means to improve their lives. Because he understood that the best means to self-improvement is education. An educated person has the possibility of widening his or her horizons, but equally an educated person has the possibility of stretching beyond. There is that wonderful line of the poet saying that a man's reach must exceed his grasp, or what is a heaven for? But exceeding your grasp is something that applies particularly to those who are not able to aspire. But when you have education, you are able to aspire to reach that which initially you could not grasp, because education enhances the possibilities for your own advancement. This Thoma Dionysius understood. Not everybody in his education institutions necessarily goes in to religious areas of endeavor. Many can move into the secular realm, but can do so infused by the strong learnings and the strong understanding that a serious education grants. Now in India today, education has become a huge industry and at the same time a huge challenge. I say a huge industry because in 1947, when Thoma Dionysius first, he had become bishop in 1940, so when he was only 7 years, we became independent. At that time, the British left us with only 20 lakh Indians in the entire country in education. Think about it. We had barely 300 colleges. There were fewer than 16 or 17 universities, and just 20 lakh or 2 million Indians out of an entire population of 330 million were enrolled in educational institutions. The British had kept us poor and illiterate. They left us with a population that was only 16% literate. And it was even worse for women, because only 8.8% of Indian women were educated. 8.8% could read and write. That means out of every 13 women in a room, only 1 woman would be able to read and write. That was the condition in which the British left us. And so there arose the huge challenge in India, the same challenge that Thoma Dionysius replicated here. But on a nationwide scale, the government's challenge was to improve access to education for everyone, to create an environment and a climate in which you would have expansion of educational opportunities and expansion of educational institutions. That is the first E of education. That there would be equity Equity means bringing in people who had been left out of the education system because of their gender, because of their caste, because of their religion or their tribal origin, because of their region, their linguistic background, whatever it may be. Bring in the excluded and give them opportunities for education. That was the second E of national policy, and that was the second E of Thoma Dionysius' educational efforts. The third E takes time, and that is the E of excellence. Let us face it, in India today, educational institutions are not always of the highest quality. I would say the better or the best educational institutions are islands of excellence floating in a sea of mediocrity. And therefore the challenge became for the government of India in terms of education policy to try and inculcate a culture of excellence in the best institutions. And this again Thoma Dionysius started to aim for. He started off just trying to expand educational opportunities in an area like Pathanapuram where there wasn't enough opportunity. Then came the need for equity. In his case, he brought in unfortunate children, underprivileged children, lower caste and tribal children and so on into his schools. Nationally, we did the same thing. And then came the quest for excellence. St. Stephen's here did not become excellent overnight. Initially, it was a small school in a remote location. But as it grew, it attracted a higher quality of teaching and a higher quality of students, and the people graduating from this institution developed a reputation, just as nationally our better institutions promoted excellence. Now, there is a fourth E one should add to this discussion of education, and that is the E of employability. Because as we know, one of the biggest challenges facing our country today is employment. As a member of parliament, I constantly have young men and women coming to me pleading for help in getting a job. For every post that was advertised, lakhs of people apply. And every month you can find a story like the story that came up last month in Madhya Pradesh, where the government advertised 122 posts for a peon. You know, a peon is a chaprasi, somebody who carries a file from one desk to another, brings a cup of tea to the officer. This is the peon's job. And for this 122 posts, they received 23 lakh applications, including over 350 people holding PhDs were applying for the job of peon. Thousands of people with master's degrees, of course bachelor's degrees, and the requirements for the peon post was only an 8th standard pass. So imagine, we have now created a society where lots of people have educational qualifications but do not have either qualifications that are relevant to employment, or there are not enough employment opportunities to absorb all of them. This is the next big challenge for education in our country. Because education is ultimately a means to self-improvement, as Thoma Dionysius recognized. But if you have no employment opportunities for you to get to with that education, then ultimately has the education served you well? Now, it's all very well for us to say that education is valuable in and of itself, that every individual who has a certain educational attainment must be a person who is a better person for being educated than not. Granted. But an educated person without a job and without the prospect of a job is actually a more frustrated person than an uneducated person who knows that because he doesn't have education, he can't get a job. That is the challenge that our society is facing today. Many of our issues in our country are linked to this problem of education. I have often said that if you look at our country's 702 districts, 165 districts have suffered Maoist or Naxalite incidents. 165 districts have been affected. Now, some of them are minor incidents, we don't have to worry too much about them. Some are major. There are at least 35 districts where the Maoists have more control than the police or the national authorities. And why is that? It's because when you have young men who are either uneducated or undereducated, are unemployed and possibly unemployable, they become easy prey to the blandishments of the misguided ideologues who offer them 1,000 rupees and a Kalashnikov to come and conduct insurrection and revolution against the state. That is the great danger. Lack of good and relevant education can actually be a national security threat to India, not just a socio-economic problem. But when we speak about relevant education, we also have to look at how useful that education is then to get a job. Every Malayali father and mother wants their son or daughter to study engineering. I keep telling them at every convocation I address, please don't do this unless your child genuinely has an interest in engineering or is passionate about it. Because India produces 5 lakh engineers every year, and 62% of them either don't get a job or end up in a job that did not require an engineering degree. So we are educating more than double the number of engineers we actually need. What's the point? Now, by comparison, we need 5 lakh doctors every year because there's such a shortage of doctors in our country. But thanks to the restrictions imposed by the Medical Council of India, there are only 40,000 graduating every year. So we have a major shortage of doctors. And yet, many of those who are graduating as doctors have no interest in practicing medicine. They have only done medicine because their parents forced them to do it. Every year I meet IAS officers and IFS officers who have the qualification doctor. And I say, oh, so what did you do your PhD in? And they say, no, sir, we are a medical doctor. And I say, if you're a medical doctor, why are you in the IAS or the IFS? And they say, well, because our parents insisted we study medicine, but our real ambition was to join the IAS or the IFS. And I say to them, don't you think you have wasted your medical education? They say, well, sir, in case we didn't get the service we wanted or we didn't pass the exams, then the medical education was a fallback. It wasn't a passion or a commitment to them, it was just a fallback. And I said, I feel so sad that you have done this because you have deprived some other student who really wanted to be a doctor of a place in a medical institution, that they could have actually developed a career as a doctor, but they couldn't get in because people like you took up that seat. To my mind, that is one of the great flaws in our society. We artificially restrict the number of places in our medical institutions, but when people graduate, they go off to other fields, and the country continues to suffer a crippling shortage of doctors. So the mismatch between supply and demand is something that economists always talk about, but we have this in education as well. I would say that when it comes to theological education, I don't think you have a problem. I think you're producing just the right number. Some might argue that you could even produce more because the church can absorb more, and particularly in the Western world, those churches that have a presence in the West know that there is a shortage of priests in those countries because in the Western world, fewer and fewer people are prepared to go in for a religious education. So Kerala can be an exporter not only of nurses but also of priests. But in every other field, in the so-called secular disciplines, there is a genuine mismatch between supply and demand, and this is perhaps a problem that Thoma Dionysius could never have anticipated when he was starting educational opportunities for people who had none. A final point worth stressing is the importance of diversity in education. I think we all know that in the schools, the secular institutions that have been established around Pathanapuram by and following Thoma Dionysius, that in fact people of all religions, all castes, all backgrounds are admitted. I think that's an extremely important issue and principle, because if you want a secular country to survive, then you need to give education to all, and you need to breed and develop a respect for people of different backgrounds, different religions, different cultures in each other. I recently published, about less than a year ago, a book called Why I'm a Hindu, in which I quoted Swami Vivekananda, who famously said that I'm standing here in the name of a faith that teaches not just tolerance but acceptance. And I found that a very profound idea. I read it first as a teenager, and it has stayed with me ever since. Because I went to school, as most of you did, I'm sure, and read in my textbooks that tolerance is a virtue, that a tolerant king is a good king because he tolerates people of other beliefs, other religions. But if you really think about it, tolerance is a somewhat patronizing virtue. Because tolerance says, I have the truth, you are in error, but I will magnanimously indulge you in your right to be wrong. Whereas acceptance is something more. Acceptance says, I believe I have the truth, you believe you have the truth, I will respect your truth, please respect my truth. Now that is the only basis for a multi-religious society like India, for all people of all religions to coexist, on a basis of mutual respect. And that mutual respect starts in the schoolroom. When you're in class surrounded by people of different faiths and different religions, when you are celebrating Christmas one day and your Hindu and Muslim friends are joining you, and when the Hindu is celebrating Diwali or whatever, and the Christian and the Muslim are joining him, and when all three together are celebrating Onam, that is when you truly have the makings of a diverse, plural, self-respecting society. And as we know, that is not entirely what everyone in our country believes. It's very striking that Mar Thoma Dionysius was actually bishop from 1940 till his death in 1972, in December of 72. His career paralleled almost exactly the dates of the longest serving head of the RSS, the Sarsang Chalak, the second Sarsang Chalak of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, M.S. Golwalkar, headed that organization from 1940, just like Mar Thoma, up to his death in March 1973, just 3 months after Mar Thoma. So their careers were almost parallel. But here, where Mar Thoma preached love and education and betterment, Golwalkar preached hatred and division and intolerance. What an interesting contrast in the opportunities that life gave to two people to head two institutions at exactly the same time, for exactly the same period of time, almost 33 years, 32 and a half years for Mar Thoma, just under 33 years for Golwalkar, and look at the difference in their messages. So today, in concluding my memorial address for Mar Thoma Dionysius, I will simply stress that here was a man who stood for and exemplified many of the best things in Indian society. The importance of education, the importance of diversity and coexistence of people of different faiths, the strength of your church, which he stood for, and above all, perhaps, his reaching out to help through education and through charity the underprivileged, the downtrodden, the unfortunates of society. Here was a great human being who lived a life which was parallel to the life of somebody else who did so much to divide and promote hatred. Here he promoted life, he promoted love, he promoted education and learning, and he promoted progress. So let me today bow my head in reverence to an exemplary life, well lived, and thank you once again for having invited me to deliver your 2018 Mar Thoma Dionysius Memorial Lecture. Nandi Namaskaram. Jai Hind.